Hi, my name is Joseph Vanoy Squires from Well Prepared. We'd like to ask the question, do you have what it takes to survive? Today we're going to do a presentation on an EMP attack. There is actually a clear and present danger of an EMP attack on the United States. You may ask the question, what is an EMP? An EMP is an electromagnetic discharge that basically fries all sensitive electronics. So your iPad, your laptop, your cell phone, your different appliances inside of your home, even your electric system that regulates your air conditioning and your water are all run by very sensitive electronic circuits. Many times EMPs are used in a military sense. EMPs can also come from a solar storm. We'll talk more about that later. But EMPs are fitted on missiles, rockets, and sometimes even mounted on satellites that are orbiting our planet at any given time. Most modern day electronics, appliances, and all the tools that you use daily are vulnerable to an EMP attack. Basically everything that is plugged into the US power grid, they all have sensitive electronic components, including the power grid itself, that can be taken out from electromagnetic discharge. An EMP overloads these sensitive circuits by introducing massive electrical charges into the air and destroys nearly all electronics. It's much like a normal blackout. You may have experienced a blackout or a brownout in the city where you live. On the West Coast and East Coast, some of the bigger cities have rolling blackouts and brownouts that are controlled by the power companies, and they restore electricity within a certain period of time. In this case, an EMP will knock out all the same electronics, all your lights, all your appliances, all your internet, except the EMP is permanent on a larger scale. Basically, it goes out and it does not come back on. The areas affected by an EMP pulse is determined on how high the EMP is detonated above the United States. Most EMP weapons are delivered via a tactical nuclear missile. So a nuclear missile, instead of reaching the ground on a certain target, say in one of the cities in California or Nevada or even on the West Coast, they detonate the EMP in the upper atmosphere, and it creates the electromagnetic discharge that basically goes to the ground. All electricity is going to try to ground itself, and it goes to the ground and fries out all of the circuits. So if an EMP were to be detonated 30 miles above the Earth, it would have a radius of roughly 500 to 800 miles. If they were to detonate an EMP up to 300 miles above the United States, they could essentially wipe out the entire US power grid, all with just one weapon. So it doesn't take 10,000, 5,000, or even 50 nuclear bombs to destroy America. In this case, an EMP could put us back into the Dark Ages with simply one weapon detonated tactically at a certain elevation above the United States. It brings an end to all telecommunications, transportations, electricity, and even utilities like water. Most people don't even know that their water is pumped into a municipal water supply via electricity. These are large electric pumps that not only pump the water, but also work with some of the different sanitation and cleansing of the water. Your sanitation systems would stop. All electronics would basically cease to function. There are some older antiquity vehicles that may still function, but certain components in all cars, all modern vehicles, do actually operate with a CPU, and those sensitive circuits would be shorted out. Light bulbs, air conditioning, refrigeration, the whole 9 yards. Everything would stop to function, and it would not be able to just be turned back on. These circuits would be destroyed. They'd have to be repaired or replaced. More and less, basically, we'd be sent back to the Dark Ages, a time when people ruled by sword. There was no medicine, there was no technology. It was pretty dark, a pretty dark age and dark times. All of the bigger cities, streets, would probably be instantly gridlocked. The gridlock would take place because of disabled vehicles. Vehicles that did continue to run would quickly run out of gas, and they'd have nowhere to go. So there'd be a mass exodus of people, basically refugees, trying to get out of the bigger cities where there's a loss of services and we're completely dependent upon electronics, but they would have nowhere to go and no way to get there. Chaos would soon follow. We've already seen in America where if there's a loss of services or there's any kind of social dissatisfaction, a lot of people are turning towards chaos, are turning towards rioting, are turning towards violence. it quickly ensues. It doesn't even need to be preceded by a serious disaster or some kind of calamity. We're living in a time and age where if your favorite football team or favorite soccer team doesn't win the game, you can quickly see rioting and chaos and looting on the streets very quickly afterwards. Some of the first people that would die during an EMP attack, besides the people that are in airplanes that are crashing, car crashes, a multitude of different fires and explosions that would take place, you'd see the sick and the elderly, the people that are on life support right now when their life support turns off, people that are dependent upon medications, pumps, that have inside of their bodies even electronic devices that are susceptible to an EMP, such as a defibrillator. You'd see that they would be the first to die. The first to be at risk would be other sick and elderly. Hospitals would be overwhelmed. Their machines would cease to function. Refrigeration would end. People that are dependent upon very specific and important medications like insulin that needs to be refrigerated would quickly find that their insulin is no longer dependable. There's no longer a supply of insulin, and their insulin itself is starting to go bad. So the sick and the elderly would be the first to be at risk and the first to die, probably in the tune of tens of millions within the first week. Second, you'd see a lot of people that are that have other medical dependencies and that in our society have dependencies on a system that is now collapsed and crushed that would be a risk to others. So a lot of people that you would see that are at risk in this case would be people that don't have any supplies, that don't have any preparation, that are surrounded by, and unfortunately, like-minded people, sometimes in the tunes of millions in the larger cities. Think about the people that are on medication right now in America with severe mental illnesses. Think about the people that are homeless, the people that have illicit drug addictions, whether it be things like marijuana or crack or alcohol, even the simple things like nicotine and caffeine and sugar, and the withdrawals that they're going through. These are people that normally couldn't face society, normally couldn't face life without the assistance of some kind of a substance. And now they've lost not only all of their regular life, all of the stuff and the things and the creature comforts of life, but they're also without their drugs. So you'd see a lot of people with mental illnesses, with violence, that would then act on those things. A lot of home invasions, robberies, burglaries, murders, rapes, thefts. In fact, in America, during blackouts and brownouts, home invasions increase up to 80%. So it's already a problem in a minor outage. In a major outage like this, you're looking at a lot of people who would fall victim to those who are desperate. The reason to get prepared is so that you're not one of those desperate people. You don't want to be the rioter or the looter who's walking down the street that other people are prepared to protect themselves from. And you could quickly become that person. You're one of those people in the crowd that's desperate, willing to do anything for food, for water, because you didn't prepare ahead of time for, in many cases, the inevitable. The third wave of people that would quickly die, or the most susceptible reason of death in the case of an EMP, is lack of sanitation. Worldwide, one of the things that kills most people is disease. So you see a large outbreak and outburst of diseases, things like cholera that aren't common nowadays, but in the cases where there's no removal of trash, there's no sewage, there's no clean water, people would very quickly become ill, and now they have no medications. Simple things that we would normally be able to have treated at a hospital could become fatal very quickly. Rioting, looting, of course, would ensue. Before too long, you'd see that there are no more resources. Most grocery stores in the United States, in the average city, have 2 to 3 days worth of food. We've already seen what happens during terrorist attacks and things of that nature, even 9/11, where people have a run on the store, like they used to have a run on the bank, and the shelves are quickly empty. Gas stations are empty. They have no more gas. They can raise the prices all they want, but if you don't have the actual resource, you can't buy it. So you'd see that stores are emptied, any stashes of medications or weapons are quickly emptied, and the resources are gone. People would try to do that last-minute hoarding for themselves. In fact, when discussing EMPs, the CIA director, James Woolsey, said that 9 out of 10 Americans will be dead by the end of the first year. So 90% of Americans, if you look at our population of 300 million, you're left with only a handful of people that would survive the disaster of an EMP. It's a very serious threat that the US government has known about since the 1960s. In fact, some of the first EMP tests were done by the Russians, wiped out thousands of miles of electronics by the low altitude detonation of nuclear weapons. It's not a far-fetched scenario. It's actually happened to our allies in the fight against terrorism. The scariest thing about EMPs is not that we've known about it for so long and not that we're completely susceptible and vulnerable to it. It's the fact that we already have an electrical grid and a system that's collapsing. We have these rolling blackouts and brownouts. But more importantly, this is a tactic that has recently been employed in the fight against terrorism. Here's a couple facts. In Yemen, June 9th, 2014, ISIS allies and al-Qaeda blackout an entire country by knocking out power for 23 million people. This was the first time in history that a terrorist attack on the electrical power grid blacked out an entire nation. First time in history. Unfortunately, ISIS is the threat that we're facing right now. This is a terrorist group that has figured out that the easiest way to attack a country is by taking out its power grid, taking out basically the heart of a nation. It's our heart and it's our blood that keeps us running, is the electricity. This wasn't the first attack and it won't be the last. In fact, in Pakistan, January 25th of 2015, they suffered a major blackout after a rebel attack left 140 million people in complete darkness without any power for weeks. Just imagine now, no power for 3 hours or 3 days, but for weeks. What would you do? How would you survive in those circumstances? What would happen in a mass-populated city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, where there's no electricity for anyone for weeks in the middle of the heat of summer or the cold of winter? Radicals connected to the Taliban also attacked the critical transition lines and short-circuited the national electric grid, plunging the whole country into darkness. We've already seen a mass exodus of refugees fleeing from these areas, and a lot of the refugees that we've seen was from these attacks. Why did all these people leave Pakistan? Why did all these people leave Yemen? Because hundreds of millions of people were left with no electricity, the effects of an EMP. Fortunately, it wasn't worldwide or nationwide. They had somewhere to go. But where would we go in America? Where would you go in your city today if there was an EMP that wiped out the entire electrical grid for the US? It's not going to be that easy to just flee the country. There would be nowhere to go. We're kind of stuck in the continental United States. So there have been other attempts. The rebels again attacked the electrical grid 3 times since January 2015. These aren't isolated incidents. The most important thing to remember here is that these do show a pattern. The terrorists have learned that the easiest way to cripple a modern country is by destroying its power grid. The question is, are you prepared for such an event? Can you prepare? We've got migrants fleeing the EU, fleeing Europe. We're accepting over 100,000 of these migrants this year that are fleeing ISIS. Amongst them may be some of these terrorists that have not only the desire to do these things, but now they have the ability, they have the experience of taking down a power grid. The President, even Air Force One, are all protected against an EMP, but we aren't. What can we do to protect ourselves? Do you have what it takes to survive? Once again, this is just a worst case scenario. Check out some of our other videos on the normal disasters that you might need to prepare for from Well Prepared. Thank you.